Hello, and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting on Episode 1 of My Hero Academia. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. So right away, we start with this opening scene of what is seemingly, I don't know what you'd call it, like a scuffle between a bunch of kids. And I think this is a particularly effective first scene because it gives some really, defining characterization for a lot of the characters involved. You know, it's very obvious some real stuff is going down despite being kids, but despite, the inherent inequality of the situation, the main character refuses to back down. So, now we're learning a little bit about the lore, and the long and the short of it is, people have superpowers now, by and large, or at the very least most people do. Some people have not won the genetic lottery, and as a result, they're just normal people in a world full of superheroes. So, it's interesting. I'm feeling a fair bit of nostalgia for My Hero Academia. It's not like it came out that long ago, but I remember I watched this first season right around the time it aired, and I was really sort of captivated by it. I guess part of it is because I really went out of my way to avoid any and all spoilers about it, and I didn't watch it as it was airing. I sort of watched it all at once, but I don't know. I think My Hero Academia is interesting because it was sort of written and animated at a time when superhero movies as a whole didn't really suck. I mean, it might not be fair to characterize them like that now, but I don't know. There haven't been a whole lot of superhero films I care about as of late, and there were at least a few a couple years ago that I did care about. That said, in contrast to superhero films, I do like the approach this takes. There's definitely inspiration taken from things like the X-Men, but it sort of, kind of takes its own approach here. Because, when you think about it, statistically, the vast majority of these people here have quirks, as they're called, and therefore have at least some capacity to be a superhero, but, only some people actually don the tights and the costumes and fight off this supervillain. And I mean, that's really the crux of the whole story, isn't it? You know, if you want to be a superhero, you have to have a license to do it. And on its face, that's almost contradictory, you know. A license does not make you a hero. Doing heroic things makes you a hero. And if doing heroic things without a license makes you a lawbreaker, then, you know, there's a real conflict here between morality and law. And to my mind, you know, some of that comes up a little bit later on, but I don't think it's ever really addressed in absolute philosophical terms. So even only a couple minutes in, it's pretty clear that Midoriya, who I don't believe we've been introduced to by name yet, he sort of knows basically everything about all these new up-and-coming heroes. And I think this scene is another rather defining moment, because the one superhero was sort of preempted by Mount Lady here, who interrupted and took out the villain. This sort of draws attention to how superheroism has been, I guess, sort of infected by, you know, showmanship and popularity contests and stuff like that. Because, you know, being a superhero and doing heroic deeds is not enough. You have to be known and well-liked by the public. Hence why Mount Lady here, who's new on the scene, saw fit to sort of jump in and intervene when her help was not really needed. You know, that's not necessarily to cast aspersions on her character, you know, she's not necessarily a bad person for doing so, but it seems as though the system of quirks and superhero licenses would seem to incentivize self-interest over altruism, where a person is more incentivized to do things that would benefit their own career than what would necessarily be the best for society. So naturally, if superheroes weren't enough of a sort of collection of tropes and things to deal with, we also naturally have to deal with that ever-present Japanese anime trope, high school. So, you know, it seems that the natural thing for everyone to do is to apply for a superhero school. And I guess it is only natural, it seeing as how everybody has superpowers. Only the people with the best powers, or the best use of their powers, would be able to make the cut. So, you know, a little bit of foreshadowing here. Midoriya and that character who's picking on him earlier in the flashback, they both have their sights set on UA, which is the premier high school for aspiring superheroes. You know, it seems like there's a definite disparity in the people who are interested in that high school. Because on the one hand, Midoriya's tormentor seems to have all the makings of a successful applicant. Midoriya, however, has no superpower, and while he might be able to squeak by on a technicality by virtue of, well, I don't know, a non-discrimination law or something like that, you know, he's certainly not a likely candidate. It doesn't really help that he's kind of spineless, too. I mean, contrary to that flashback, he stood up for somebody when the going got tough, but in everyday interactions, he really doesn't have much of a spine. You know, the poor guy's probably got a lot to deal with if he is one of very few people who doesn't have a superpower. I mean, if there really is all sorts of crime running amok, superpowered crime no less, you know, I'd imagine that's a pretty big liability. Alright, so here's a little plot thread right here. The blonde kid mentioned All Might, who was, a big superhero. He's basically like, I guess a parallel to Superman, like an absolutely morally upstanding superhero, but it seems that there's a bit more to him than meets the eye if he was all, spindly and emaciated, and then sort of transformed. Alright, so we saw Midoriya scribbling in this earlier, and it's sort of like his hobby, taking notes about all the various professional heroes, their talents, their skills, their weaknesses, and all that. I feel like something like that is not something to be discarded lightly, but, this guy is really kind of a jerk. And a lot of these early episodes do a very good job of characterizing him as a rather unsavory person. He's sort of set up to be like a person who is born with a really great superpower, and as a result, he's never really suffered through any adversity, If it came down to a fight, he'd be stronger than them. People want to suck up to him because they think he's somebody worth following. Yeah, I guess that really seals it. That's a rather callous comment, telling somebody to take a little toaster bath and hope they get a quirk when they're reincarnated. So, things aren't looking too great for Midoriya here. He could still apply despite everything that's happened, but whether or not he has much of a chance as he is now, who can really say? And just to really sell the point that, this is something he really cared about, he was, and indeed still is, a huge fan of All Might. To the point where even watching, news footage, now, it's interesting that Midoriya refers to this as, disaster footage from a long time ago. That makes it seem like All Might has had a rather long and glorious career, which, I suppose he has. And I think this is a rather striking video, too. All Might is this guy with super strength and all that. Basically like the classic suite of superpowers. And I think it is rather remarkable how he can sort of carry a dozen injured people on his back and do it with a smile on his face, as if to say, yeah, this looks bad, but it's not really that bad because I'm here to fix things. I think there's something to be said for putting on an optimistic face when you're trying to help people through trouble. So this is where everything really went wrong, It might be, a doctor's checkup that a kid might normally have, but at this point, the doctor's making it pretty clear that Midoriya is, in all likelihood, born without a quirk. It should have manifested already, but seeing as how it hasn't, it likely won't. So interestingly enough, it's a weird thing that, the way the body works, the doctor's saying that, an extra joint in the pinky toe of the foot is indicative of a likelihood that you don't have a quirk. Seeing as how he has that joint, in all likelihood he doesn't have a quirk. It's not like it's a real cause and effect thing, but a correlation. I think that's an interesting detail, just because, there are things like that, where, like, weird little correlations in physiology portend other things or conditions. But, the upshot of all of this is that at a very young age, Midoriya's life has been effectively derailed. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it was never a given that even with a quirk, he could become a superhero. But it is rather unfortunate that the dreams of a kid were crushed so mercilessly so early on. I also think that, maybe everybody's sort of jumping to conclusions a little bit. Obviously, they don't have the same comic books here that we do, but there are a great many superheroes who don't have powers themselves. Granted, there are other extenuating circumstances, and it's not like Midoriya could rise to the occasion in quite the same way, but I don't know. Like, if he really wants to follow All Might's example, then the least he should do is continue to be as optimistic as possible and make, realistic steps towards achieving his goals. So unfortunately, Midoriya has run afoul of that slime villain from earlier. He seems to have escaped All Might. Now, this is one of the interesting things that isn't really addressed right away, but some people have quirks that make them rather monstrous in appearance. Presumably this guy is human, but his quirk gives him an amorphous form. In a sense, it's not beyond the pale that somebody like this would resort to a life of crime. I can't imagine anybody would willingly associate with somebody who looks like that. Not even because they hate them, but just because they're so different from any other human that, I don't know, like, there's no sort of social protocol for interacting with somebody like that cordially. So this scene, it's kind of like Superman showing up to stop, like, an ordinary mugging. This guy, he is so far out of his depth, but he doesn't really seem to realize it. He's still trying to fight back, regardless of how futile it is. So for Midoriya, this certainly has to be some sort of a dream come true, His hero, his absolute idol, has saved him from a villain. That's gotta be worth something. I really like the voice acting for All Might here. It's very fitting for somebody who looks like he does. Just the way he sounds really matches with how he looks and how he should act, given his philosophy. So, not only is All Might just a consummate hero, he's also very diligent about taking care of his fans. Even before Midoriya had asked him, he had taken it upon himself to sign his notebook. Unfortunately, it's not that this isn't quite good enough for Midoriya, but, surely he's going to want to ask all sorts of questions about his history, trivia, and perhaps even, could somebody like me become a hero? I mean, if anybody would know the answer to that, surely it would be the hero who is held in regard above all others. Maybe Midoriya has made a bit of a mistake by sort of grabbing onto him as he jumps across the city. So naturally, this is where the plot begins to thicken a little bit. As big and strong as All Might is, it seems that perhaps he's not entirely what he's cracked up to be. We saw him transform earlier on, and he seems to be bleeding a little bit now. I mean, he certainly is a hero, and he's a mighty and imposing figure. But, as with every great superhero, he certainly has a weakness too. So this is an interesting scene here, because Midoriya, he's sort of weighing up everything he's already heard before, that his dream is impossible, and he's weighing it with the potential of maybe hearing the same thing from his idol. That would be rather unfortunate, to put it mildly. But nevertheless, you have to ask. It's better to find out the bad news as early as possible, so to speak. So, just to draw it out a bit and really make us think, we're not getting an answer right away. Naturally, this is by design. You have to have a little suspense in what is essentially the introductory chapter. Alright, well that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.